Good afternoon. Welcome to our final session of today. I'm Jamie McCall. I'm the creative director at PLB. We're a design and interpretation consultancy in York. I'm chairing the events in the theatre here today, and we're very fortunate to have Elise Foster Vander Elst as the head of exhibitions and environmental impact lead at the Design Museum. And she's going to tell us about Towards a New Model of Exhibition Making, a case study from the Design Museum. To you, if you give a round of applause, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I've not used one of these systems before, so can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, fantastic, and I'll try not to shout in your ear. Thank you so much for coming today. So I'm from the Design Museum, which is just around the corner. You may have visited us way back when at Shad Thames when we were in an old banana warehouse. But in 2016, we moved to the old Commonwealth Institute. And that is where we run a very diverse programme of temporary and touring exhibitions. And we also have a collection. So my name's Elise. I'm head of exhibitions. So my team looks after the production and the getting things done of everything related to the exhibition and displays programme. And since 2023, so since last year, I've also been the environmental impact lead. And actually adding that to my title was a really important shift to enable me to be more of an advocate for a greener way of making exhibitions at the museum. So this is the roadmap for our time together today. We're going to start with a brief vocabulary check-in because I'm very passionate about having the right language to feel empowered to talk about this planetary emergency. I'll tell you why it's important, give you a case study of an exhibition that was a real gear changer for us, and then tell you a little bit about the learnings and how we got to where we are and where we will go in the future. Okay, so vocab check-in. Now, this is really important. When I started working in this environmental space with museums, there are a lot of terms that I, quite frankly, didn't understand. And people who have been in the climate movement for a long time use them really regularly, expecting people to know what they mean. But if you don't, it can really be very disempowering. So this first one, and this is the only term I'm going to give you today, is what is a scope? Because it's talked about a lot and it is directly important to our work. So scope 1, direct emission from owned or controlled sources. So if you have a factory or if you have company vehicles, that's what we call scope 1. Scope 2, our pink friend in the middle, indirect emissions. So this is from the generation of purchased electricity, heating and cooling. Now, typically, a lot of museums will have actually really quite good practice around scope 1 and scope 2. They may have been reporting on scope 1 and scope 2 for many years. You may have very many talented colleagues in your estates and facilities team who know all about this. If you do, go and talk to them because you can learn a lot. Now, scope 3, the green bit, that's where exhibition makers, producers, curators, conservators, that's where we all have a tremendous amount of agency. And it's also very messy. So scope 3 is everything else. It's your supply chain. It's things that you do not directly control, but you have an enormous amount of influence and agency. We live a lot of our lives in scope 3. It's messy, it's sticky, and historically, in many institutions, we've just ignored it, but we can't ignore it anymore. We have to take action urgently. So to look at it another way, this is how I remember it. Scope 1 is what you burn, scope 2 is what you buy, and scope 3 beyond, everything else. So as you can see here, there's really a lot that is involved in exhibition making. It's making crates, it's transporting people on research trips, it's couriers, it's the plastic we use to wrap our graphics, for example. And this is going to be the focus of our talk today. Why is this important? Obviously, we know that the planetary emergency is here now today, but why is it important for museums? We know that museums are not the worst offenders. We know that they are forces for good. But interestingly, a report from Julie's Bicycle from 2021 showed that museums are responsible for almost a quarter of CO2e emissions, more than theatre, dance, libraries, and other cultural institutions. Now, we know that's primarily owing to the great responsibility we have to care for our collections, and many wonderful groups like the Bezo Group are working to look at the protocols around collection care to reduce energy. But it's also around our exhibition tours and our exhibitions, whether they're temporary or permanent, and how we put them together in our buildings. Now, this is a really important report. This is the Act Green report by audience agency Indigo, which was released last year. And there are some stats I wanted to draw your attention to. And I show you this because it's a really helpful tool when advocating with senior colleagues about why is this important. And it's important because of the planetary emergency, but also our audiences expect us to be doing, to be honest, much better than we are. Now, this is interesting. 77% of audiences and visitors think cultural organizations have a responsibility to influence society about the climate emergency. We are a trusted public institution, whether you're a small gallery or a big one. We have a voice, we have a platform, and audiences know that, and they think we have a responsibility to communicate that trust to the public. And this is interesting too. 91% expect organizations to ensure materials are reused after an event or an exhibition. Now, of course, we all try and do this. We all want to do this. Often it makes financial sense to do this on a small scale. But on a big scale, particularly for bigger museums, bigger operations, there's no storage, and a skip in the loading bay is a really common sight that I think actually if our audiences saw that, they would be extremely disappointed in us. But we know that's the way of the world, but we have a responsibility to change it. Okay. Moving on to an exhibition, which for us was a catalyst. It was a gear changer. There's been a before and after this exhibition. The reason I'm standing here today talking to you is because of this show, so I'm very excited to tell you about it. To coincide with COP26, which was held in Glasgow in autumn 2021, we opened an exhibition called Wastage: What Can Design Do? It was a beautiful temporary exhibition. It was in our main gallery space, and it had all the trappings of a normal temporary show. A lovely timeline charting our very complex relationship with waste and plastic. It had a wonderful installation by an incredible artist called Ibrahim Mahama. And this installation explored e-waste that in Western countries, we put in the recycling and we give ourselves a nice pat on the back that we've recycled our batteries or our TV without thinking about the cradle to grave life cycle and who is actually recycling that material out of sight, out of mind. And that was a very interesting and challenging piece that was in the show. This is one of my favorite pieces, a photo from Life magazine, and I'll read it out in case you can't read it. The objects flying through the air in this picture would take 40 hours to clean, except that no housewife need bother. They are all meant to be thrown away after use. So how far we've come from plastic being this aspirational material to something that's a real problem in our daily lives. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. We had wonderful pioneers like Stella McCartney, who's been a champion of sustainable fashion for a very long time. And as a design museum, we were working with designers to find solutions to this terrible problem that in some ways design is responsible for. This take, make, waste economy, this planned obsolescence, we're really implicit in that. And we want to recognize our role historically and find future ways to fix it. But how could we talk about an exhibition on waste without acknowledging that we were creating waste products? So we decided to approach things really differently in terms of how we talk to designers. We embedded wastelessness into the design brief. It was a need to have, not a nice to have. We reused wherever possible. We really rethought the material palette, the types of materials that we were using, being brave and going away from the classic, well, we always do MDF walls. And we designed for deconstruction and reuse. Many times I've tried to reuse things, showcases, plinths, and at the last minute, someone glued it when they shouldn't have, and you're just stuck with it, and you've got no storage, so it goes in the skip. So we were really thinking about this from the start of our journey, trying to follow broadly this waste hierarchy. So I'll just show you some images of how we did reuse our materials. So these very simple bricks, we reused them for a previous show, and actually they're really versatile. There's no glue, there's no mortar. We stack them up, making sure, of course, that it's safe, stable, and we reuse them again and again. They're super neutral, and they've been really handy things for us when trying to design for reuse and reusing materials. We rethought the material palette. So we did a lot of research with a wonderful architectural studio called Material Cultures. And they really were, like I said, brave, went away from the traditional museum materials. And we ended up with something like this. So wood wall panels that were made in cassettes, And this is actually an Adobe brick wall. And we chose not to fire these bricks. And by not firing them, we saved many tons of CO2e. Also, these bricks, they were not joined or glued or mortared. We had a little bit of mortar at one end, just because as a risk-averse project manager, I couldn't help myself. But the structural engineer said it was completely fine. It was self-supporting, self-stacking. And by not joining them, we were able to disassemble them and give them away really easily. Whereas if everything's glued, you end up taking a big sledgehammer to something, have these enormous slabs of things that you don't know what to do with. So again, from the outset, really thinking about the whole life cycle of our materials when deciding what our design choices were. We really focused on our 2D design as well. Now, of course, on the general grand scale of an exhibition, some vinyl isn't the biggest carbon impact, but it's just horrible and it's not a good look. So we wanted to move away from vinyl, move away from Foamex panels. And we did so using this nifty little machine. So it's a handheld printer, and we printed direct to media. So really saving on a lot of those really nasty materials that have become a staple of exhibitions over the years. And just to show you some of the results, it was really high quality, it was beautiful, and it was very easy to use. It was a bit of an investment, maybe £1,000, a bit less, but we use it again and again, and it's a really handy thing to have now on site. Our labels, we did quite a bit of analysis actually. The instinct was to use paper labels, but we knew this exhibition was going to tour. So we used a carbon accounting tool to figure out if we use paper labels and we reprint them every time, is that better or worse than using recycled plastic labels that we could wipe clean, reprint with our handheld printer? And the data showed that this was better. So we used this. And this is an example of how we use data to inform our decisions. Because intuitively, I would have said, oh, cardboard all the way. But that intuition sometimes is really off. So we needed to have those tools and that real fact to back up our decisions. And finally, our catalogue. We're very proud of our catalogue. It was printed with vegetable-based inks in the UK and no plastic shrink wrap. So we embedded wastelessness into the brief, but that wasn't enough, really. I wanted to understand what was the carbon impact of this whole show. All activity has an impact, but I had no idea what the impact of this would be and really didn't have the first clue of how to measure it. So we worked with some consultants and we did a life cycle assessment. So we measured and captured everything. And we used this tool that we made, which is basically a fancy Excel spreadsheet. And I'll just read out some of the bottom tabs. So we looked at crates, we looked at what happens when something tours, we looked at development, so computer hours, we looked at if we were reusing materials, and that sort of gave us credits, and we looked at museum operations, and of course the build. And we used this tool also to make decisions to decide, are these cardboard labels better than the plastic ones? And it was really helpful to understand. It was like the veil had been lifted and suddenly we felt empowered and informed and really knowing where to move the needle and what decisions mattered and really what didn't. Because again, you can waste a lot of time turning your camera off on a Zoom call. It doesn't move the needle. Focus your team's time and attention on looking at your shipping and your build. So we used all this information. And this is what we found. So we were able, for the first time in 2022, to do a proper carbon assessment of an exhibition. I'd never done this before. I can tell you what a £500,000 exhibition looks like. I can tell you what a £10,000 exhibition looks like. I didn't have the first idea what a 28-ton exhibition looks like, but now I do. And by capturing that data, we were able to really understand the impact of our decisions. So this yellow bit, for example, 31%. Now that's really interesting to me. And I wish I'd had data from before we had a much better approach to this topic, because I'm sure historically build would have been, tremendous, maybe 70%. But what really struck us, and this was such a good opportunity for learning, was this one, 39%. This was one object that came from abroad. Now you'll see transport from the UK was 1%. We tried to prioritize local objects to reduce shipping, but this 39% came from abroad. We had planned, with all best intentions, like all good project managers, to ship this item. However, unsurprisingly, I suppose, at the last minute there was a production delay and we had to fly some elements of it, which is why this has such a big footprint on the graph. But again, if I was being generous, I could say, oh, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. But if I'm being realistic, stuff like that always happens. So we have to plan for it in advance. So the Wastage project team at the Design Museum finished that show, did all of their wonderful carbon accounting, and really knew a lot. And I knew a lot, and I was very grateful for this learning. But we have lots of different project teams at the museum. So my task was then to make sure that all the other project teams could benefit from this experience and take it into their own projects. Also, colleagues in the sector like yourselves were asking us, like, what did you learn? How did it go? How can we do better? So we decided to make a toolkit. This toolkit is online. Please take it. It's completely free. It basically synthesizes all of our learnings. It also has very simple things like checklist of what to ask your contractors, questions to ask your designers, things that are really common sense. But by having them in a document, you can copy paste them, make them your own, tweak them. And also sometimes it's just helpful to know that you're not alone when you're talking to contractors. It's not just you thinking it's important. There is an infrastructure behind you, supporting you, giving you tools. You know that I'm asking them that as well. And that can be really helpful when people are not willing to budge. With our lovely friends at Culture Connect, we've translated this into different languages with the hope that it will reach lots of different audiences who may not be super comfortable with English. Now, going back to that one artwork that had that big blue section of the graph, as you can imagine, I was really disappointed at first. I was actually quite embarrassed because I felt like we worked so hard to choose these objects. How did we make this mistake? I just couldn't get my head around it, but decided to tackle that mistake as a fixer. And so what we did was we built a decision tree just to help curators or whoever is selecting the objects really understand the impact of their decisions. And so now with items, much like you do intuitively with a budget, can I afford it? Is it worth the carbon? And you ask it on several occasions, is it worth the carbon? And at the end, if you feel like it really is, because after all, we're museums, we have stories to tell, we have objects to show, I'm kind of fine with that. What I'm not fine with is that whoops moment where you just didn't realize, because we're better than that and we can do better than that. Now, going back to our cardboard and plastic caption, we also wanted to streamline our thinking about which materials to use when. We've all got really tied up in knots when we go to the supermarket. Is it better to take a cotton tote bag, but that's really bad to the water impacts, or a plastic bag, but they end up in the ocean, and that can lead to paralysis, confusion. So we just wanted to step away from it, provide a simple decision tree where we could look at materials and understand what is better for what scenario, because it's never one size fits all. We know that. If it was, we'd all be doing it. So this decision tree, which is also in the pack, invites you to ask, and I'm so sorry, it's quite tiny, but you can download it. Is the exhibition temporary or permanent? Will it tour? Yes, no, yes, no. And at the end, you come to a list 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, this list corresponds to a table. And here you have different materials depending on your ambitions for this project. So if it's an exhibition that's going to tour, it's going to be on the road for 5 years, you want materials that are durable, that are going to withstand rugged reuse, not something you're going to have to change every 6 months. So you would use a certain rag list. If it's something that's up for a few weeks, maybe for a learning project, then you could use something flimsier that has a much lower carbon impact at the outset. Now, of course, we look after collections. We're not saying that we can never, ever again use virgin acrylic for a hood, for a beautiful loan. Of course not. But this sets a tone and it sets a framework when we're talking to our contractors and our colleagues in the sector to really say what our intentions are. And you have to really persuade me to use a red item. Green, fine, amber, let's have a chat. But this is a real concession if we use this. It's not a standard slapdash. We use this terrible material that's really bad for the environment. We need to move away from that. We do have a lot of agency. And this are some examples of our exhibitions where we've used these rags, we've used these decision trees. The Wastage show, it had a certain earthy feel, but using low carbon materials don't always have to have an earthy feel at all. These walls are made out of honeycomb card, and actually they stood up surprisingly well and even went on tour to the Netherlands. These mannequins, they're all saved from landfill and refurbished under the guidance of conservators to make sure they're fit for purpose to show garments, but they're saved from their ex-retail mannequins. Our Rebel exhibition, again, a very shiny, beautiful show on London fashion. We used eco-board panels, which is made from 100% agricultural waste. So those horrible formaldehyde-soaked materials, hopefully that's going to be a thing of the past. We also big fans of fabric wrapped walls, wrapped around a timber frame, again, just reducing the materials. Now, of course, sometimes you need to hang things on walls, so cardboard and fabric isn't going to work. So what we did for our current exhibition, which is on view at the moment, is we worked with a designer and a build lead, and we made some reusable movable walls. So we commissioned a small suite of walls, which launched this April, and we're going to move them around the gallery. We commissioned just a small amount, partly for cash flow reasons, partly to test them, and then every show we'll keep investing until we have a lovely suite of walls that we really like to use, and hopefully those single-use MDF walls will be a thing of the past. We're also trying to communicate to our visitors, to communicate with transparency, with honesty, saying what we're doing, inviting them for a conversation. We're not saying we're perfect at all. We're not, but we're trying really hard, and we want to bring them on the journey with us. So these are my top tips. Reuse, borrow, use tools, get data. Data is your friend. Prioritize modular design. Glue is not your friend. And talk to contractors. You know, there's nothing worse than you've worked so hard to get beautiful, let's say, honeycomb foam panels for your interpretation, and then they come wrapped in reams and reams of cling film. It's absolutely heartbreaking. In my experience, contractors really want to do better. They really want to do things differently, but we need to work together to solve these problems, to find a really good, high quality solution that is doable from their side and suits our needs. But how? So, the Design Museum, we're quite small, we're about 100 people. How did we go from an institution who didn't know what a ton of carbon was? It looks like that, by the way. I didn't know what that really meant. How did we go from not knowing what this was to benchmarking all of our exhibition displays in 2023? And this is data that we gathered from every show last year to really understand some trends. I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm really proud of the trajectory that we've been on. And the answer is the rule of 25%. So I don't know if you're familiar with this rule. The idea is that 25% of people is a tipping point. If you can get 25% of people rallied around a common goal, the opportunities, the possibilities for change are extraordinary. Now, 25% of, I don't know, the Science Museum might seem like a lot of people, but what's 25% of a project team? The Design Museum, that's 1 or 2 people. What's 25% of a senior leadership team? Maybe that's 2 or 3 people. All of a sudden, these numbers are quite manageable. And if I was to track our journey at the Design Museum, it started with 1 show. 25% of the project team were totally on the bus, and we got the data and we used the right language and we understood our stakeholders' considerations and constraints, and we brought everyone together. And then that one project team, that haloed out into all the other project teams. And now as an institution, this is something we're all really, really passionate about. So if you feel like you're part of the 25%, but you're a little lost and you don't have any support, you do. Everybody sitting here is probably part of the 25%. If you're not yet part of the 25%, trying to do better, trying to change the system, the time's now. So what's next? So I've started a new thing, which is quite fun and a little bit weird. So we need to understand, how can the planet and future generations be a stakeholder in our conversations, right? We know we have to do this. We know we should do this. But why? I'm not going to give you a doom and gloom monologue about the climate change, but it's really important. So going by this lovely saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. What I've started doing in my head, and if I'm feeling really brave, I'll do it actually in reality, is having an empty seat at the table of project meetings. That is for future generations. That is for the planet. That is for the key stakeholders in our future that don't have a voice. They're not in my project team meetings. They're not in our departmental meetings. But our actions are going to directly impact their day-to-day, their future, their problems to fix. So my invitation to you, perhaps in your head if you're a little bit embarrassed, or not with an actual chair if you're feeling brave, have them as stakeholders, have them at the table, or they're just going to be eaten. And this is a lovely quote, and please, if you remember one thing from this presentation, remember this today. It's from Nick Merriman's wonderful book, Museums and the Climate Crisis. It's better to start the journey and be accused of being hypocritical and imperfect rather than doing nothing and waiting to be perfect. That is my invitation. Do not let the perfect drive out the good. We have to do something. You will never get it right. It's not possible. We are not trained specialists. We do not have the resources and the money to do things perfectly, but we can do things better. So in terms of what's next, sharing a few things that we're working on that we really hope people will be involved in across the sector. So we've started a new arm at the Design Museum, which is an environmental responsibility consultancy. So we're currently working with a group of museums, helping them really analyse their institution's sustainability strategy and understand how it works for their business, their area of the business or the charity. What we found is a lot of institutions have a beautiful sustainability strategy, but no one actually knows what it means, and it doesn't change anyone's day-to-day. It sits in a drawer or with the exec, but it's not actioned in people's daily lives. I also wanted to make you aware of the wonderful, wonderful Gallery Climate Coalition. They have a new calculator that we're advising on, which will be launched this autumn. So the lovely Excel, well, maybe lovely, maybe not, depending if you like Excel. That fancy Excel that I showed you, that was our calculator. They also have one, but they're making a new one, taking the learnings from our Excel and many other learnings to make a new one which will be free for the sector. GCC are a charity. This calculator is being funded by a charity. It will have lovely UX design. It won't be a scary looking Excel. And we really hope that everyone will use it, will give it a go. Ideally, the whole sector would use it, and then we could look at it big picture and understand, where do we need to move the needle as a sector? Where do we need to advocate for training? What are the things we really don't understand, or do we need to do some campaigns around? So if you'd like to know more about that, do sign up to Gallery Climate Coalition and have a look at their site. We're also developing some tools with the Touring Exhibitions Group and the Art Fund's Going Places Network. So we tried to make a decision tree for touring. Turns out it was going to be more of a decision forest. So we're going to make some tools. We're not quite sure what they'll look like, but they will also be free and available to everyone, and we'll be sure to put them out into the world around autumn time. And we're also going to be launching Museums 2030. So this is a new informal peer support network for museums who would like to be in this conversation, who would like to share tools and best practice, who would like to explore circular economy solutions. And we'll be launching that in the summer. If you're a museum and you'd like to join, if you scan this QR code, it takes you to a very simple form. Send us your details, and once we've got ourselves organised, we'll reach out to you, because we'd love to have loads and loads of people at that table, and together we can advocate for different ways of doing and share learnings, because we all make mistakes and we all have opportunities to learn together. And a final note, I want to tell you a little bit about South Ken Zen, which is a network which is driving change locally. And I'm telling you about this because you might also have a network local to you where you could come together to be greater than the sum of your parts. If I've learned one thing in the last few years, is you cannot do this alone. One Lone Ranger trying to push against the closed door by yourself is impossible. Find stakeholders, find friends, find advocates, build networks, and then we can really make change together collectively. So this is South Kensington. You can see some of the old favourites. We've got V&A, NHM, Science Museum, Royal Albert Hall. These organisations and many others in the neighbourhood and the Design Museum, we've come together to create a group, basically to be greater than the sum of our parts. We're looking at having collective understanding about the scale of the climate crisis to advocate for it and advocate and hold each other accountable. Collective action and collective voice. And we've done this through a series of pillars. This work is really ongoing. It's a big group. So change takes time, but the impact of that change will be huge. So we're looking at standardizing our reporting to benchmark and reduce together. A procurement charter, very important. You know, we do have quite a lot of spending power when we all come together, even if our budgets feel smaller and smaller. Centre of excellence. In this room, there's so much talent, expertise. We need to use those talents and knowledge and experience to move the needle. And a neighbourhood vision. We'd like to become an exemplar of a low carbon neighbourhood. So just a small goal. It'll probably take a few years, but the website's there if you'd like to learn more and you think that's something that might be helpful in your local community. Right, you ready to be in the 25%? What's next? Make it a priority. Here are lots of different resources. So the toolkit you've seen today is the first one. We also did a report which was supported by DCMS with lots of recommendations. I'm trying to chip away at those recommendations, but please join me, have a look and see if you'd like to be involved. The Act Green benchmark report with that audience data is the third one. Julie's Bicycle, we wouldn't be where we are without Julie's Bicycle. They have so many resources. They are the giants on the shoulders on which we stand. The GCC, they've got a wonderful decarbonisation action plan. So if you don't know where to start and it all seems a bit much, have a look at this. It's great. It's very bite-sized. Send it to all your colleagues, take a page each, and you can really move the needle. They also have something called being an active member. Again, it's a fantastic thing to do. It seems quite simple. You have to do 3 things, but the back end and the work behind those 3 things will transform your organisation. So check them out. And if it's all a bit much, there's a Headspace YouTube link there, because climate anxiety is real, but we're not alone. We can work together. It's all going to be all right. And if you're interested in learning more about the bigger picture or personal responsibility, the BBC's Rethink Climate was a wonderful podcast. And Take the Jump is a fantastic, fantastic platform to understand what you can do in your life today. So I'm not going to read out this quote because it always makes me cry, but read it. So to finish, know your power, act now, be in the 25%. Thank you.
Elise, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. Are there any questions before we all head off for today? One at the back here. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Hi, Elise. Thank you. That was amazing. I'm a trustee for the Association of Heritage Interpretation, and we are looking actively at, we're doing an HLF bid at the moment to look at museum free cycling and building greener materials and greener exhibitions. So that's been amazing, and I will be in touch with you if that's okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. And actually, one of my missions for 2024 is to pilot a circular economy hub, probably starting with the South Kensington network, because we're all neighbours, so we'll be able to move materials around. But there's huge potential there, and it's quite straightforward. Don't chuck stuff away, put it somewhere. But it's actually a really complicated problem. So I'd love to be in touch with people who are trying to tackle that problem too, because I feel like we really can if we put our heads together.
Hi, thank you very much for that. It was really informative and really helpful. I just had one question, which was, do you have any advice for specific companies or suppliers to get really good resources or information that we could use in our day-to-day?
That's a really good question. When we work with our suppliers in the museum, we've been really trying to team up with designers who know quite a lot about this subject, or if they don't, they're really happy to research it. So we've just been doing a lot of research on the go, and what suits one exhibition, for example, the wood wall walls, perhaps look a bit too earthy and earnest for a fashion show. So we'll research different materials, but we've been doing that with the suppliers. And often they'll tell us, you could get this or that, and they're really helpful. And understanding, one thing we've learned from the suppliers is we need to club together more and buy these eco materials, because then the price will come down. You save carbon on the shipping and bulk. So it's something that we've been really working collaboratively with the suppliers.
Okay, is there anybody else? No, so if that's it, can we just give a warm thank you to Elise? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Graveyard slot. I thought there'd be no one, so nice to have you all. Thanks.